Wednesday night service. All right, we're going to stand. It's been a while since I got to sing with y'all. I'm so excited. Okay, we're going to stand up. Do we need to stretch? Like, I feel like we need to stretch or something. I'm teasing. Okay, we're going to sing a couple of songs, and then Pastor Lee is going to start us in Bible study. Y'all sing out. I'm satisfied with just a cottage below, a little silver and a little gold. But in that city where the ransom will shine, I want a gold one, that silver line. All right, lift it up. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk on streets that are purest gold. Though often tempted, tormented and tested, and like the prophet, my pillow of stone. And though I find here no permanent dwelling, I know He'll give me a mansion my own. 'Cause I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk on streets that are purest gold. Don't think me poor, deserted or lonely, 'cause I'm not discouraged. I'm heaven bound. I'm just a pilgrim in search of a city, and I want a mansion, a harp and a crown. 'Cause I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk on streets that are purest gold. 'Cause I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk on streets that are purest gold. But walk on streets that are purest gold. Amen. Y'all did really good, but I think y'all can sing a little louder. Okay. All right, we're going to sing this one out. Are you ready? The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Amen. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. When my strength is failing, the end draws near, and my time has come. Still my soul will sing your praise unending. Amen. 10,000 years and then forevermore. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship his holy name and sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship your holy name. Sing that again. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship his holy name and sing like never before. Oh my soul, I worship your holy name. Yes, I worship your holy name. Lord, I worship your holy name. Amen. Get seated. Y'all may be seated.
All right, I'm glad that you're here tonight. Thank you, Wendy. Open your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 3. We're going to look at chapter 3 and chapter 4 tonight, which is really the heart and soul of the book of Nehemiah. It's not the only great part, but it is just right at the heart of the book. And so we're going to look at these two chapters tonight as efficiently as we can. Remember, we are in the study of Nehemiah. He has now gone from Babylon back to Jerusalem. He was the cupbearer to the king. He was brokenhearted when he found out a report from his brother that the walls had been broken down and still had not been repaired over all these years. And the city was really very much in ruins. And so he went back, made an assessment, and felt God leading him to lead the people to rebuild the wall. So last week he made that announcement to the people after making his assessment. They all agreed, let's do that. Let's rebuild the wall. God had been preparing their hearts, and they knew that Jerusalem needed a wall around it. So that's where we left off last week. Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 1. Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, and as far as the Tower of Hananel. The people of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zakur, son of Imri, built next to them. Now, I'm going to be sharing a lot of names tonight. I'll do my best. But this is important, and I really didn't want to skip these names. We'll look at them or study some of them in just a little bit. So bear with me as best you can. Verse 3, the fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassenaah. They laid its beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired the next section. Next to him was Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Mejezabel, made repairs, and next to him Zadok, son of Baana, who made repairs. The next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, but their nobles would not put their shoulders to the work under their supervisors. The Jeshanah gate was repaired by Joiada, son of Paseah, and Meshullam, son of Besodiah. They laid its beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Next to them, repairs were made by men from Gibeon and Mizpah Melatiah of Gibeon and Jadon of Marinoth, places under the authority of the governor of Trans-Euphrates. Uzziel, son of Harhiah, does that look right? Harhiah, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the next section, and Hananiah, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. They restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Japhiah, son of Hur, ruler of a half district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section. Adjoining this, Jedediah, son of Harmoth, made repairs opposite his house, and Hattush, son of Hashabniah, that's not right, Hashabniah, how about that? Hashabniah. Wow. Couldn't they just have named him Bob? He made repairs to the next to him. Malchijah, son of Harim, and Hashub, son of Pahath Moab, repaired another section of the Tower of the Ovens. Shallum, son of Halohesh, ruler of a half district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. How about that? Verse 13, the valley gate was repaired by Hanan and the residents of Zanoah. They rebuilt it and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. They also repaired 500 yards of the wall as far as the dung gate. The dung gate was repaired by Malchijah, son of Rechab, ruler of the district of Beth Hakarim. He built it and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Now, let me stop right there. I'll start up again in just a moment in verse 15. Is there anything that you notice in what I've read so far, other than my terrible pronunciation, that stands out to you? There are some interesting things that occurred, and we'll look at it in just a moment, but did you notice anything? Yeah, obviously, that was one of the things that really stands out. I don't know if he didn't have any sons, or his sons were out of town. I don't know. Or his daughters were just unusually stout gals. And so I don't know, but daughters helped. And this kind of effort requires all hands on deck. And so I commend them. Anything else you might have noticed? Okay, hang on just a second. What were you saying? The names for the gates. Okay, yes. And we're going to look at that in just a minute. Okay, there were some nobles that didn't do it. Isn't that interesting? He mentions that. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Okay, all right, verse 15. The fountain gate was repaired by Shallum, son of Kolhazeh, ruler of the district of Mizpah. He rebuilt it, roofing it over and putting its doors and bolts and bars in place. He also repaired the wall of the pool of Siloam by the king's garden, as far as the steps going down from the city of David. Beyond him, Nehemiah, son of Azbuk, this is a different Nehemiah, by the way, completely different guy, ruler of a half district of Ben-Zur, made repairs up to a point opposite the tombs of David, as far as the artificial pool and the house of the heroes. About 6 years ago, when we were in Jerusalem, and it was 2 trips ago, with a group from here at First Baptist Church, our guide was an archaeologist, and he took us to a place that no guide had ever taken us because he was an archaeologist. There was an archaeological dig that was taking place around the base of the foundations of the wall of Jerusalem. It was over on the side where the temple is, which is an exciting place to be digging. It's a place called the City of David. And so to get to the foundation where they were digging, it was actually underground in a tunnel. So he took us there. He had the key. It was all locked up, the complex. He had the key, unlocked the padlock, and let our group in alone. And we went down there. At the time, it was padlocked. I understand they take tours through now, but we went through that tunnel, and we saw those amazing stones. And I turned to the archaeologist, and I said to him, because they were really down low, the below ground foundational stones. And I said, are any of these from Nehemiah's wall, and do we have any of Nehemiah's wall? And his basic response was no. And from an archaeological point of view, it's very evident that these huge, massive, well-cut stones are far too refined and impressive for what Nehemiah was able to do, given the tools and the work and the time that he had when they built the wall. But he was sad when he said, no, there's none of Nehemiah's walls. Well, that has actually changed. There was a section of wall that's not really a section of the wall now, but it was a section of wall back in the day of Nehemiah. They had misdated that, and they didn't know it until a few years ago. There was a tower, every so many sections they have a tower to the wall goes up to provide support for the wall. And so this ancient tower was eroded enough, the mortar was bad enough to where it was in danger of collapsing, and they were concerned for a safety issue. And so they did, and I don't know if you know this, what archaeologists do to very important sites. They actually put a number on every single stone in the entire tower of this huge stone tower. And after numbering every single stone and taking all the pictures of it, they then completely disassembled the entire tower right down to the base of it. When they got to the base of it, or actually before they got to the base of it, they found potsherds, pieces of pottery that actually dated the wall at a very different time than they thought, a much older time, and it was right around the time of Nehemiah. They got to the base of the wall, and there at the foundation of the wall were the skeletons of 2 dogs. Now, that was substantial. It was a burial of these 2 dogs, and they did that for 1 generation and 1 generation only during the Persian period, because Persians believed that dogs were good luck. And so at the base of walls and base of foundations and the base of houses, they would bury dogs because that would bring good luck to the building. And so they found these 2 dogs, and there are many other places, all Persian era places, that they found dogs as well. So it was a known thing. They found these 2 dogs, and they knew immediately this is during the Persian period. The only wall built during the Persian period was Nehemiah's wall. And so they then reassembled all of this wall, this tower, and put in the correct mortar and everything. But now they know that this section is a section of Nehemiah's wall. And I've got a picture of it. That's not it. Before you go to the picture, stay here. Now, this made a good poster. I made you a poster. But this is, you can tell, this is current. And by current, I don't know, maybe 1,000 years old. But you see those huge walls, huge stones there, and then smaller stones on top. But they're all cut and pretty refined. All right, let's see Nehemiah's wall. This is a 52-day wall in the Persian period. That's what that would look like. And I assume that's the tower there on the left. I don't know that, but you see that person standing there. So it does give you some scale as to the size of the stone and the monumental task that it would have been in order to do that. And I'll leave it right there just for a second. So in this article, I found this article in the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. And again, this is all debated. You'll find archaeologists that have all kinds of opinions. But in this article, it says, studying Nehemiah's account, Dr. Mazer, that's the one in charge of it, noted that the construction of the northern tower and associated wall, which he had scientifically dated to around 450 BC, matched precisely with the biblical account. Not only did the dates match, so did the quality of construction. The tower and wall were not masterpieces of engineering. Their construction quality showed that they had been built hastily, just as Nehemiah recorded. Now, it wasn't sloppy and it wasn't a terrible wall, but it wasn't like the first picture. It wasn't amazing. There was no, wow, this is stunning. It was a wall. Nehemiah chapter 3, our chapter for tonight, this is the article speaking. Nehemiah 3 describes the wall's construction in detail. It specifies various lengths of walls, towers, and gates being rebuilt, along with the names of the workmen. Comparing the section of wall that Dr. Mazur discovered right here with the biblical description, one can even speculate as to the specific person who built it. From Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 15 and 16, which I just read to you, the builder of this section of wall was Nehemiah, son of Azbuk. Now, again, it's a different Nehemiah, but that's Nehemiah's wall. And I find it ironic that it's a different Nehemiah. The one section that we have left was built by a guy named Nehemiah, even though it's a different guy. So Nehemiah, he did good. Nehemiah, son of Azbuk, whoever he was, he built that section of wall. With that, I'm going to give you just a rendering of what the whole wall looked like in terms of size. So go to the next one. All right, go to the third one. We'll go back to this one. Okay, so the wall, of course, around Jerusalem is much larger now, and by the first century was much, much larger. And so the wall boundaries changed over the centuries depending upon how they were doing and how big Jerusalem became. But this was the breadth and the basic shape of the wall for Nehemiah. And you'll see up at the top is the temple. And then you'll see different gates. Here's the fish gate. And I looked up the fish gate because I found the fish gate interesting because Jerusalem is not like the sea, by the Sea of Galilee like Capernaum. There's nothing around. Now there's the Dead Sea, but there's no fish in the Dead Sea. But there is the Jordan River. It's not right by it, but they could go to the Jordan, fish the fish out of the Jordan and bring it up. But I read that they called it the fish gate because that's where the fishermen sold their fish. I don't know. Anyway, I just found that interesting. But roughly that's the size. All right, go back to the other one. Now what I like about this one is it shows, based on the description in Nehemiah chapter 3 and 4, who the sections, the different sections, and who built those sections. Do you see that? If you look up here, up on the top right is the fountain gate. And right to the left of that is Nehemiah ben Azbuk. That would be the section of wall you just saw, right there. And they color-coded each person or each family and group as they built walls. Now, Nehemiah was a smart guy. These projects were all headed by men, even though some daughters helped, and they probably weren't the only women helping, but they were headed up by men. Now, if you want men to do something, ladies, get us in a contest. And I guarantee these men, because they were all building their section, and they can see the other guy's section besides them and down the way from them, and I guarantee there was a contest going on as to who. That's smart thinking. That's smart thinking. Anyway, so I'm not saying, but yeah, I am saying, that was interesting. Everybody had their own section. He could have just said, everybody go at it. You know, work together, do the best you can. He didn't do that. He assigned certain sections to different men and their families or their towns, and then they all had a wall building contest. And I bet it was a hoot. Okay, verse 17. Next to him, the repairs were made by the Levites under Rehum, son of Bani. Beside him, Hashabiah, ruler of half the district of Keilah, carried out repairs for his district. Next to him, the repairs were made by their countrymen under Benoi, son of Henadad, ruler of the other half district of Keilah. Next to him, Ezer, son of Jeshua, ruler of Mizpah, repaired another section from a point facing the ascent to the armory as far as the angle. Next to him, Baruch, son of Zabbai, zealously repaired another section. Only place that the word zealously is in here. In other words, this Baruch dude, he was going at it. He was all in. From the angle to the entrance to the house of Eliashib, the high priest. Next to him, Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired another section from the entrance of Eliashib's house to the end of it. The repairs next to him were made by the priests from the surrounding region. Beyond them, Benjamin and Hashub made repairs in front of their house. And next to them, Azariah, son of Messiah, the son of Ananiah, made repairs beside his house. Next to him, Benoi, son of Henadad, repaired another section from Azariah's house to the angle in the corner, and Palal, son of Uzziah, worked opposite the angle and the tower projecting from the upper palace near the court of the guard. Next to him, Pedadiah, son of Parosh, and the temple servants living in the hill of Ophel made repairs up to a point opposite the water gate toward the east and the projecting tower. Next to him, the men of Tekoa repaired another section from the great projecting tower of the wall of Ophel. Now, there is something I've noticed in here, that some of these guys were repairing the wall that was near their house, which tells me that it's not just bizarre coincidence that Nehemiah assigned them part of the wall that's near their house. I get the impression that Nehemiah divided everything into sections, and they said, we'll take this section. Kind of like adopt a highway program. You pick one near your house to make that clean. So they picked this section that was near their home and to make that, which is good, because if they did a poor job, every day when they left their house for years to come, they'd have to stare at that ugly wall and know, or if they did a great job, they can look at that. I remember when we did this sanctuary, and I had different families in different groups, not that I'm any Nehemiah, do these walls. Now, all of these stones in these 8 pillars here were done by families in the church, none of whom are stone masons, as well as all the stone in front of the stage and this wall back in the back. That took us the longest in order to get done. And so some people, now don't go staring at them, but some people just have natural stone abilities more than others. I'll just leave it at that. But they did, and some of them went at a much faster pace. It was very tedious, laborious work, and they did great, and there they are. Not a single stone has fallen to this day, and that was done by men in the church instead of hiring it out. All right. But now, every time, for those of you who did that, you know who you are. You know that's your place. That was your family's wall. I had parents and children working on it because that was their family's wall. All right, where was I? Verse 28. Above the horse gate, the priests made repairs, each in front of his own house. Next to them, Zadok, son of Immer, made repairs opposite his house. Next to him, Shemaiah, son of Shechaniah, the guard at the east gate, made repairs. Next to him, Hananiah, son of Shelemiah, and Hanun, the 6th son of Zalaph, repaired another section. Next to them, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, made repairs opposite his living quarters. Next to him, Malchijah, one of the goldsmiths, made repairs as far as the house of the temple of the servants and merchants, opposite the inspection gate, as far as the room above the corner. And between the room above the corner and the sheep gate, the goldsmiths and merchants made repairs. I love the detail that he puts in here. We don't know where the corners were, but again, you can kind of piece it together. Apparently, that's what they've done. Now, there are a few lessons from this, and I want to share that with you just briefly before we go into the next chapter. Number one, God uses all kinds of people. You'll notice, of all the descriptions of these, how many were described as stone masons? I don't think a single one. At least 2 or 3 times, priests are mentioned here. Levites are mentioned here. Everybody participated, men and women, and probably children were helping as well. So God uses all kinds of people. Professional craftsmen, it does mention them, and even people outside the city came in and helped. So there was a place for everyone and a job for everyone to do, exactly like our church and the kingdom of God today. I was standing out there a few minutes ago watching Wendy sing. I'm thankful for her and for Ann. And had you told Wendy 5 years ago that she would be up here on stage soloing and leading in worship on her own, bless her heart, Roxanne had a terrible sinus infection today. She could barely talk, let alone sing. And so she went home, and God bless her, Wendy stood up and led instead. And had I told her, or had you told her 5 years ago that you're going to be standing on the stage, leading in worship, soloing, she literally would not have believed you. Literally. But God is using her. I don't know if you were here Sunday. I told her she had an Adele moment because she was cranking it. I mean, it was fantastic. And if you weren't here, you just flat out missed it because the internet was out Sunday, and so none of our music service got recorded. It's the first time in years that we didn't record the music service, but we didn't, so you just missed it. If you want to hear some more, you have to come back Sunday. But it was fantastic. It was fantastic. And so it takes all kinds of people. Wendy's our secretary, and yet here she is. And you, sitting out there, you have all kinds of jobs and all kinds of responsibilities, and yet you guys are working with children and youth and all kinds of ministries here at the church, Upward Sports, etc. And so thank you so much for your hard work here. Secondly, you need to notice that not only does God use all kinds of people, that leaders have to set the example. If anybody in the city should have been busy in the work, it should have been the priests, and they were busy. For the glory of God was involved in the project. So in the very first verse, it mentions the high priest, and he used his consecrated hands to do the same labor that everybody else did. And I guarantee you, if you go back to that picture of Nehemiah's wall, I guarantee that was back-breaking work. Everybody doing that work, they didn't have those nice rubber-coated gloves that we use today. For everybody doing the work, their hands were bloody, their backs were sore, they were scratched up from head to toe, including the priests and everybody else. And so I commend them for doing that. Just like Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:31, whatever you do, do it for the glory of God. It says whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Eliashib enlisted the other priests to work at the sheep gate in the northeast corner of the city. Since the sacrifices came into the city that way, the priests would be especially interested in that part of the project. Sadly, the high priest that mentioned in verse 1, Eliashib, did not remain true to his calling, because later he allied with the enemy and created the high priest and created problems for Nehemiah. We'll see this in chapters 13. Some people who enthusiastically begin their work may drop out or turn against it for one reason or another. Eliashib's grandson married the daughter of Sanballat, who was one of the primary guys in opposition of Nehemiah. And so his son married this guy's daughter. This son married the enemy's daughter. And so you can imagine that alliance influenced the high priest. So God uses all kinds of people. Leaders have to set the example. And then third, some people simply don't work. They will not work. In verse 5, as somebody noticed, Tegoa was a town about 11 miles from Jerusalem, and some of their people traveled to Jerusalem to assist in the work. What a contrast between these people and their nobles. The Tekoites built in two places on the wall. We see that in verse 5 and verse 27. While their nobles refused to bend the neck and work in even one place. Somebody noticed that a while ago, that there were some people that, no thanks. They thought they were too important, or they were just too lazy, or whatever. Remember that manual labor is just something that God's people do. Paul was a tent maker. Jesus was a carpenter. Don't you know both of those are laborious, difficult professions that require hard work? We also see in this section that some people do more work than others. Everybody listed, with the exception of those few people, worked hard, but some of them worked even harder. I don't know if you noticed this. Did you notice that some of them are mentioned more than once? They completed their section, won the contest, and then they moved over and started work on another section, and so it mentions them in those sections as well. Most workers are happy to lay down their tools when their job is finished, but these people ask for additional assignments, apparently. It isn't enough for us to say that we have done as much as others. We must do as much as we can as long as God enables us. All right. Nehemiah chapter 4. Any comments about chapter 3 before we look in chapter 4? The trouble starts in chapter 4. Yes? It would blow their mind. And I bet those nobles in Tekoa, if they could read this right now, wish they'd have shown up and done a little work. But yes, they had no idea. They had no idea that their names would be recorded in infamy for thousands of years. That's a good point. Anybody else? All right, chapter 4, verse 1. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews, and in the presence of his associates in the army of Samaria, he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from those heaps of rubble, burned as they are?" Tobiah the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? Even if a fox climbed on it, he would break down their wall of stones." Verse 4, "Hear us, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity." This is Nehemiah praying, by the way. "Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders." So how did Nehemiah respond to ridicule? Notice what he didn't do. He didn't talk smack for smack. He didn't go out to them and let them have it, call them a bunch of idiots or a bunch of bullies or anything like that. Instead, he went to God in prayer. He prayed and asked God to fight the enemy for him. And this is the third time you find Nehemiah praying, in chapter 1, verse 4 and 11, in chapter 2, verse 4, and now in chapter 3. And it will not be the last time. Verse 6, "So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart." Nehemiah faced a great challenge and had great faith in a great God. But he would have accomplished very little had there not been great dedication on the part of the people who helped him rebuild the wall. With the kind of humility that befits a godly leader, Nehemiah gave all the credit to the people when he wrote verse 6. "We rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart." Now, I should have exclaimed this and should have read this for my 25th anniversary. And I hope I said something along these lines. I don't remember. The day was a blur. But of course, I celebrate 25 years here because the people, you guys, have been willing to work for 25 years, many of you, to build this church. And so thank you for that. Verse 7, "But when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the men of Ashdod heard that the repairs to Jerusalem's wall had gone ahead and the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat." Now, I really like this. I find it interesting. I don't like the opposition, but I like the response to the opposition. So God is blessing them, and half of the wall. So nobody takes them seriously. You notice the name calling and the mockery. Even if a fox jumps on it, it's going to fall down. That had ceased. And now they feel threatened because it's halfway up there. Philosopher Gilbert Keith Chesterton once said this: "The Bible tells us to love our neighbors and also to love our enemies. Probably because they are generally the same people. And that's exactly what those people in the day of Nehemiah were. They were their neighbors, and then they became enemies. Nehemiah's arrival in Jerusalem was a threat to Sanballat and his associates, who wanted to keep the Jews weak and dependent. A strong Jerusalem would endanger the balance of power in the region, and it would also rob Sanballat of his friends of influence and wealth. When things are going well, get ready for trouble, because the enemy doesn't want to see the work of God make progress. As long as the people in Jerusalem were content with their sad lot, the enemy left them alone. But when the Jews began to serve God and bring glory to God's name, the enemy became active, and that has never changed. Opposition is not only an evidence that God is blessing, but it's also an opportunity for us to grow. The difficulties that came to the work brought out the best in Nehemiah and the best in God's people. Satan wanted to use these problems as weapons to destroy the work, but God used them as tools to build his people. When Sir James Thornhill was painting the inside of the cupola of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, at one point he finished an area and stepped back to view it. Had he gone back one more step, he would have fallen from the scaffolding and probably died. Seeing the situation, a friend who was up on the scaffold with him seized one of the brushes and rubbed paint over a part of the picture he had painted. The artist rushed forward to protect his work, and at the same time, his life was saved. When the picture of our life or ministry is not all we think it ought to be, perhaps the master artist, our Savior, is rescuing us from something far worse and preparing us for something far better. Verse 10. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out, and there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Now, this is a problem. In fact, this is the first real problem. I mean, they have all kinds of threats. They're having to have armed people, armed guards to protect the people in the wall at this point, lookouts. But this is not coming from the enemy. This is coming from the laborers. This says the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is given out, and there's so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. They're getting to the point where they think, oh my goodness. They're tired at this point. They're sore. I don't know if you've ever had a day's work that was so hard that you woke up the next morning and you couldn't really move. Or maybe, if you haven't ever done that, have you ever been snow skiing? Because going down those slopes for 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, you go back, you have just enough energy. I mean, every ounce of energy is gone. You have just enough to eat dinner because you're starving. And then once you eat dinner, you go to your hotel room and you collapse. And you wake up the next morning, every muscle that you have, and muscles you didn't even know you have, are hurting because you use a lot of strength going down those slopes. Well, that's how these guys felt and more. They're exhausted. This is hard work. And, they're not stonemasons. One of them was a perfume guy. Did you notice that? I guarantee a guy who sells perfume doesn't rebuild walls. So bless their hearts, they're having a tough time and they're getting discouraged. Discouragement is a key weapon in Satan's arsenal. It was discouragement that kept Israel from entering the promised land, if you remember. In Numbers chapter 13, they said, we will not be able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. They were discouraged. The 10 unbelieving spies, it says in chapter 32, verse 9, the 10 unbelieving spies discouraged the heart of the children of Israel. As a result, the nation wandered in wilderness for 40 years because they gave in to their discouragement. We are not able is the rallying cry of all who take their eyes off God and start looking at themselves and their own problems. These discouraged Jewish workers were actually agreeing with the enemy who said that they were feeble and they couldn't do it. Sanballat had openly declared that the work would stop, and it almost did. Verse 11. Also our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them and will kill them and put it into the work. They're not only discouraged, now they have something to fear. Verse 12, then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. Isn't it interesting that it says 10 times over? Verse 13, therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Now that's great. I love that. That's a great rallying cry. It's very short. Now you see what he did. The wall had been finished up to about half its height, but some places were higher than other places, and some places, many of the places probably, were so high that the enemy couldn't get over them at this point. But there were still some places that weren't so high, and those were the vulnerable places. And so Nehemiah immediately took action and strategically placed armed people there so that the enemy couldn't get in. That's pretty smart, isn't it? And again, he's not qualified either. He's a cupbearer. What does he know about military strategy? But he's a smart guy. Anyway, the Jews who lived in the outlying villages kept bringing a report to the city that the enemy was planning another surprise attack. Whether these Jews were merely spreading rumors or helping to promote a conspiracy, we don't know. But they told the story repeatedly, 10 times at least. That's a figure of speech, apparently. In his first inaugural address on March the 4th of 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt said to a nation in the grip of an economic depression, those famous words, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. He may have borrowed the thought from, Henry David Thoreau, who was an American naturalist who wrote in his journal on September the 7th of 1851, which was many years earlier. He said, nothing is so much to be feared as fear. Why? Because fear paralyzes you. And fear is contagious and paralyzes others. Fear and faith cannot live together in the same heart. Why are you fearful, ye of little faith? That's a quote from Jesus in Matthew chapter 8, verse 26, when he woke up from his nap in that boat. What are you afraid of? Oh, you of little faith. Frighten people, discourage others, and bring defeat. Verse 15, when our enemies heard that we were aware of their plot and that God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to his own work. From that day on, half my men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon with the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. So there's a trumpet. The trumpet guy, he's got the best job. Hopefully, he never has to do his job. He's like the vice president. Verse 19, then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. So we continued the work with half the men holding spears from the first light of dawn till the stars came out. At that time, I also said to the people, have every man and his helper stay inside Jerusalem at night, so they can serve us as guards by night and workmen by day. Neither I nor my brothers nor my men nor the guards with me took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when he went for water. So Nehemiah was a man who planned his work and worked his plan. And the way he did it is an example for us to follow. 38 individual workers are named in these two chapters, and 42 different groups are identified. I struggled with every one of them, but he was very thorough in that, so I wanted to read them. There were also many workers whom Nehemiah did not name, whose labors were important, and each worker, named, whether named or anonymous, was assigned a place and a task. The famous evangelist D.L. Moody once said this: "A great many people have got a false idea about the church. They've got an idea that the church is a place to rest in, to get into a nicely cushioned pew and contribute to the charities, listen to the minister, and do their share to keep the church out of bankruptcy is all they want. The idea of work for them, actual work in the church, never enters their minds." And there are some people like that. By the way, D.L. Moody was from the 1800s. No air conditioning. He did not realize just how comfy our chairs and our pews and our air conditioning and heating would be, even back then. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and 14, Paul compared individual Christians to members of the human body. He says each member is important and each has a special function to perform. The people finished this difficult task because they obeyed the same leader, kept their eyes on the same goal, and worked together for the glory of God. Neither the enemy outside the city nor the difficulties inside the city distracted them from their God-given task. Like Paul, they said, "This one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and pressing forward." That's what God calls us to do as well. All right, any other comments or questions about either chapter for tonight? Okay, that concludes our Bible study. If you'll take your prayer sheet for the week, if you need a prayer sheet, would you raise your hand? Okay. Diane's going to come and give you a prayer sheet. Thank you, Diane. If you need a prayer sheet, raise your hand.